watching St. Michael's Journal, the journal of exorcism and all other things that go on in the night. After spending nearly 10 years developing the storyline, an American writer and producer pitched his idea to the various studios. Finally, after many failures, one studio ordered a pilot episode, which is said to have had over 5,690,000 viewers when the program was first released. The ratings were so good, the studio immediately ordered the first of what was to become a highly popular show spanning 15 seasons. The television series Supernatural was on its way to become a cult classic. In the spirit of the classic American road trip, a genre that has had over 100 feature films and episodic TV series, brothers Sam and Dean Winchester travel across the country battling demons, poltergeists, and a host of other evil creatures. The writer and showrunner through the first 5 seasons, Eric Kripke, was a fan of urban legends and based much of his work on familiar spooky tales. While most of the paranormal concepts were overly dramatized for entertainment purposes, those familiar with preternatural events often recognized fictional plot lines based on real-life experiences. Demonic possession was a recurring theme throughout the series. Kripke illustrated the phenomena by using a cloud of black smoke suddenly appearing and rushing to enter its victim through the mouth, permanently rendering the victim possessed and unable to fight back against its oppressor until either the spirit was exorcised or the victim was killed. Near the end of the first season, Kripke and his crew needed a way to illustrate the phenomena of instantaneous short-term demonic possession, an event in which a diabolical entity temporarily possesses or oppresses a victim with the intent of using the victim's body as a tool to reside in and do their dirty work in the world. Kripke and his staff did this by causing the victim's eyes to suddenly turn black. As we go through our days here at St. Michael's Journal, we frequently see people committing random acts of stupidity, rage, and violence, to which one of us will make a remark, something to the effect of, he or she must have black eye disease. Black eye being our code word for temporary possession. Of course, we are being facetious, injecting humor during a serious situation to counter the knowledge that the person who is the object of our joking might be demonically possessed. Keep in mind that while there have been the occasional reports of people's eyes turning black during an exorcism, it is not a normal occurrence. I wish it were otherwise. I wish that their eyes would actually turn black, signifying that the demon has taken over their body. It would certainly make our job easier. The phenomena of temporary possession is the first of the topics we examine in this episode. Exorcists will almost universally proclaim that possession is rare. However, that position is one that reality is forcing us to thoroughly re-examine. As we mentioned in our episode titled Monsters That Touch, Demonic Dolls, and Stone-Throwing Ghosts, Oh My, Another Paranormal Potpourri, we wrote, there is often a blending of the psychological and preternatural. Those who are battling demonic forces also have psychological issues. It is not an either-or situation in many cases. There are people I have ministered to whose lives have been in danger due to diabolical attacks that mimicked their mental illnesses. It was clear to everyone involved that both the psychological and preternatural were at work. If we had ignored the signs, some people may well have committed suicide. It's that serious. These words are an excerpt from a piece titled "We Need Deliverance Teams in Every Diocese" by Constance T. Hull, and reflect a growing trend in the mental health care field in which some doctors and therapists admit psychological therapy can benefit from spiritual interventions. St. Michael's has reported on one such mental health care professional, Dr. Richard Gallagher, who wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post titled, "As a psychiatrist, I diagnose mental illnesses. Also, I help spot demonic possession," explaining how he works with exorcists in their efforts to liberate people from demonic possession. Gallagher's book, Demonic Foes: My 25 Years as a Psychiatrist, has an interesting passage in Chapter 4, Troubles of the Spirit, Diagnosing the Spectrum of Possessions. Gallagher writes, "I came to see by that early stage that the major task of physicians in working with exorcists is to differentiate what may be termed troubles of the spirit from troubles of the mind. The former are also called extraordinary attacks of evil spirits, which include possessions and oppressions. These conditions exist on a continuum, representing a spectrum of penetration by demons. In turn, each of these conditions needs to be distinguished from what believers call ordinary influences of evil spirits upon humans, or simply temptations." At St. Michael's, we tend to agree with Dr. Gallagher's statement. These conditions exist on a continuum representing a spectrum of penetration by demons. If one considers possession as a spectrum, a scale so to speak, with classic full-blown possession, in which the demon takes such total control that the victim is unaware of what is happening at one end of the spectrum, or fully aware and totally unable to resist at the other end, then yes, this type of possession is very rare. However, at the other end of the spectrum we find that, which has been characterized as oppressions, at times a temporary possession, is absolutely out of control and has been at pandemic levels for some time. Dr. Gallagher followed the above quote with this observation: "Human beings are also perfectly capable of sinful or evil behavior on their own, of course, though there are plenty of people who prefer to blame their misbehavior on demons." As we look at demonic oppression and what we are referring to as temporary possession, we will also look at the psychological issues that lead to, as Gallagher put it, those people who prefer to blame their misbehavior on demons. We live in a time when perhaps we are witnessing far more instances of outward displays of anger and frustration, conditions that far too often contribute to humans doing something that normally they would not do, but due to the underlying conditions, they commit an act which is totally out of character. Perhaps you have either an adolescent or adult child, a spouse or domestic partner, an employee, or someone in your life that when questioned after they pull off some boneheaded stunt, they respond when asked, "Why did you do that?" by saying, usually with a whiny tone of voice, "I don't know." The Dunning-Kruger effect is a type of cognitive bias in which people believe they are smarter and more capable than they actually are. Having done something dumb, out of character, something they could have had a potentially dangerous outcome, they answer with a lie, "I don't know," so that they do not have to admit they overly estimated their abilities. They would rather lie, commit another transgression, than to admit the truth. Cognitive dissonance is another example of a condition in which the individual might refuse to answer candidly why he or she did something. Have you ever found yourself knowingly indulging in something you're well aware is bad for you? It's a perplexing part of human nature, often leaving us baffled about our own actions. This enigma, rooted in the realm of psychology, ties closely with the concept of cognitive dissonance. To cope with this dissonance, individuals often resort to mental gymnastics. They might justify their spending by labeling it as a one-time indulgence or rationalizing as a reward for hard work. This justification process rejects the complex interplay between emotional desires and logical reasoning, revealing how cognitive dissonance influences our decision-making. In everyday life, cognitive dissonance manifests in many forms. Take, for example, the person who knows they should save money but splurges on an expensive purchase. The eternal conflict between the logical thought of saving and the emotional pull of gratification illustrates cognitive dissonance. It's not just about financial decisions. This conflict pervades various aspects of life, from health choices to moral dilemmas. Here we have but two of the many psychological issues that should be ruled out before jumping to the conclusion that someone in our lives did something reprehensible due to demonic oppression or even temporary possession. As with classic possession, temporary possession results in the victim having either no knowledge whatsoever of what he or she did, as if they blacked out just before the event, or they know what happened, but they were unable to resist, powerless to stop their outward actions. Another issue that is rampant in our society that sometimes causes the perpetrator to commit reprehensible acts is narcissism. We have reported on narcissistic behavior in the past. Therefore, we will not delve deeply into the subject in this report other than to examine the most common, most visible display of narcissistic behavior: aggressive driving and road rage, as recent studies have demonstrated the connection between narcissism and aggressive driving. Although all of us become frustrated or angry when sitting in traffic or when we're in a hurry and someone is driving too slowly in front of us, for most people the frustration is temporary. It's also unaccompanied by the need to punish those around us. And despite temporary anger or frustration, most people care enough about their passengers to place their safety above the thirst for vengeance. Not so for narcissistic drivers, however. Aggressive driving includes behavior such as speeding, tailgating, blocking other drivers, swearing or making obscene gestures at other motorists, horn honking, flashing one's lights, driving off the road, running stop signs and red lights, and yelling at other drivers. Beyond causing distress to their passengers and others on the road, aggressive drivers pose a significant safety hazard. Specifically, approximately 50% of driving fatalities are linked to aggressive driving by narcissistic people. The late M. Scott Peck, M.D., a renowned psychiatrist and author, equated classic possession with malignant antisocial behavior of those with extreme narcissistic personality disorder, or NPD. But NPD seems to be somewhat of a spectrum as well. Therefore, this temporary possession I speak of can manifest itself in people with NPD in varying degrees. Some people only show signs of temporary possession when they feel they are somehow inconvenienced by other drivers, causing them to be triggered and lose the ability to think rationally. After getting a traffic ticket or causing an accident and asked why they did whatever it was they did, they will either blame it on the other driver or claim to not know why. In some cases, they really do not know. The clear connection between aggressive driving, road rage, and demonic possession, especially temporary possession, is very, very real. We must be careful to heed the words of Ms. Hull, who we previously quoted as saying, "There are people I have ministered to whose lives have been in danger due to diabolical texts that mimicked their mental illnesses. Keeping her words in mind before we try to rationalize someone's negative behavior as being due to merely cognitive dissonance and or the Dunning-Kruger effect. It was clear to everyone involved that both the psychological and preternatural were at work. If we had ignored the signs, some people may well have committed suicide. It's that serious, according to Ms. Hull. Suicide is not just the only destructive act we see being committed by the temporarily possessed, but murder as well. Another phenomenon we want to touch on in this report is that of childhood imaginary friends. Imaginary friends, also known as pretend friends, invisible friends, or made-up friends, are a psychological and a social phenomenon where a friendship or other interpersonal relationship takes place in the imagination rather than physical reality. Although they may seem real to their creators, children usually understand that their imaginary friends are not real. The first studies focusing on imaginary friends are believed to have been conducted during the 1890s. There is little research about the concept of imaginary friends in children's imaginations. In a 2007 report, Clausen and Passman found that imaginary companions were originally described as being supernatural creatures and spirits that were thought to connect people with their past lives. Today, while most children who develop imaginary friends create harmless entities, there are cases in which the imaginary friend wasn't imaginary but a very real preternatural entity. A relationship that can become very concerning very quickly. Both imaginary friends and malevolent entities masquerading as such seemingly appear out of nowhere. Starting about ages 2.5 to 3 years of age, and then up to around 7 or 8, you may notice an imaginary companion or two or more show up in your child's life. According to Marjorie Taylor, professor of psychology at the University of Oregon, and who has written the definitive findings on imaginary companions, roughly 65% of young children have them, and their arrival often coincides with children's developing imaginations, which is a good thing. But imaginary friends can also be a very negative force in your child's life. In some cases, the imaginary friend is not imaginary, but another personality of the child, or what was once known as multiple personalities, and is now thought of as dissociative identity disorder, DID. Of course, dissociative identity disorder isn't limited to just children who have an imaginary friend. Teenagers, as well as adults, can develop the condition as well. On the website maintained by the Cleveland Clinic, we find the following statement. Disassociate means to separate or disconnect. People with dissociative identity disorder may experience several different personalities, usually referred to as alters. Each identity may have different behaviors, memories, thought patterns, or expressions. The identities may have different ethnicities and ways of interacting with their environments. These personalities may control your behavior at times. Memories may not transfer from one identity to another, which can cause amnesia, gaps in memory. The presence of amnesia is often an important symptom that raises concerns for the diagnosis. DID interferes with your ability to function in your day-to-day. It can impact your relationships with others and performance at school or work. Note their statement. Memories may not transfer from one identity to another, which can cause amnesia, gaps in memory. The presence of amnesia is often an important symptom that raises concern for the diagnosis. This symptom they refer to as amnesia corresponds to the observation Dr. Gallagher made in his book. I had already seen about 8 or 9 cases of what I regarded as full possessions. I define these cases where the evil spirit completely takes control of someone, such that the victim has periods when he or she has no remembrance of such episodes. The Cleveland Clinic posited that there are two kinds of dissociative identity disorder. One, possession, which they describe as identities present as if an outside being or spirit took control of your body. You might speak or act differently in ways that's obvious to others. It's an unwanted identity and the personality switch is involuntary. And two, non-possession, in which identities are less known to others. You might feel a sudden change in your self-identification as if you're watching yourself in a movie, an out-of-body experience, instead of being in control of your speech, emotions, or behaviors. Exorcists tend to lump these two conditions together as one: possession. In certain circles, such as that of mental health care professionals, imaginary friends are sometimes referred to as imaginary companions, IC, and a scholarly paper written on a study done on a group of children can be found on the internet. This study was conducted with the children and their guardians being interviewed, and a list of questions was presented to each participant. One child had ICs that made him hit himself and other people, and in these situations the child was physically hurting. The ICs, imaginary companions, also squished his head, which hurt, and he was wondering how something that is not really there can actually hurt you. Children describe that ICs make them play games and watch videos when not allowed to, hit themselves, parents, and others. Some children told that they do not remember what they have done when the ICs were in control or what was done when the IC was being mean. One child aptly pointed out that the imaginary companions cannot be called imaginary friends because they, his ICs, are mean. 11 out of 19 children reported having an IC that was with the child when he or she was angry. One child reported that he had different ICs and some of them were agitative, while others were trying to calm him and the other ICs down. He told that the mean ICs were trying to kill each other, and one of the ICs, the nice one, tried to calm everyone down. The mean ones also told the child to kill other people. One of the ICs also told him to kill himself because no one cares. The internet is full of stories told by people of their experiences with imaginary friends. Most are pleasant memories, but a surprisingly large number of them are very unpleasant. For example, one young woman reported that she remembers watching her imaginary friend do harm to other children on the playground. This could be a good example of childhood dissociative identity disorder, or one of possession, in which the possessed person is unable to do anything to resist and is forced to watch. The young lady simply did not share enough information to make a determination as to whether she was possessed or simply suffering from DID. In a podcast on an NPR affiliate, a mother and her daughter share how the daughter's childhood imaginary friend, an older man, become frightening. While one's child having an older man as an imaginary friend might be concerning, the situation might only be the child craving a father figure or the presence of a benign, grandfatherly type person. In this account, the latter was not the case. During the interview, which was apparently many years later after the event, the daughter told the interviewers that at first the entity was friendly, even comforting. but it became increasingly threatening. Oddly, the entity taught her a song that she said it had told her it sung to its own child. The little girl memorized the lyrics and often went about her days singing the tune. Years later, the mother learned that the song was originally from the late 19th century, but had become popular later on using revised lyrics, which many of us remember as the words to the song known as A Bicycle Built for Two. The question arises, how did the child learn the original lyrics that are now largely forgotten? The mom reports that as a child she had her own frightening experiences, those common to the reports of a poltergeist, such as mysterious tapping on the window, the TV in her bedroom turning on and off by itself, etc. Then years later, the daughter began to have many of the same experiences herself. Noticing that her child was becoming more agitated during the day, displaying signs of not getting enough sleep, this mom took action. She says, I still had her baby monitor, and I decided I would get it out and put it in her room just so I could hear when she was up, so I could make sure that she went back to bed. And I could hear her having conversations. And they were definite conversations. She would speak for a while, and then she'd be quiet. And then she'd speak again. She would answer somebody. Somebody was talking to her, but you could only hear her voice. The situation continued to escalate until the night that the entity attacked the child. Screaming frantically, the small girl ran to the baby gate and tried to climb over. Hearing screams, the mother jumped out of bed, opening the door, only to find her daughter hanging over the gate screaming, Mommy, help me! Mommy, come help me! She tells as she looked into the girl's room to see the window curtain sticking straight out from the wall as if blowing in a gale-force wind. Except the window was not open. In another case review, one from Australia, an article titled, A Sydney Mom is Convinced Her Son's Imaginary Friend is a Ghost That Haunts Their Home, we read of the story of Rachel, her husband Andrew, and their two sons, Oliver and Max, who had moved earlier that year into a new, to them, home. Rachel revealed that 4-year-old Oliver began talking about a girl named Clara a few weeks after the family moved into their new home. We thought nothing of it, Rachel said. Kids have imaginary friends all the time. I've heard that some people think they're actually ghosts and that kids are more open-minded, which is why they can see them. But to be honest, I thought that was stupid. And so Rachel and Andrew merely chalked Clara's existence up to a case of overactive childhood imagination. But then one night, Oliver's 6-year-old brother, Max, asked his mother why she hadn't set a place at the table for Clara, Oliver's friend, the one with the dark hair. Apparently, both the boys were seeing the same entity. Andrew wanted to confront their son so that they could put Clara to bed once and for all. However, Rachel was much more apprehensive, as all she wanted to do was protect Oliver. The pair eventually compromised by deciding to wait it out a few more weeks. If nothing changed, they agreed they would take some kind of action. But things only got worse. It's like a switch was flipped, Rachel said. They were small, explainable things at first, like random blackouts and flashing lights. But then things started breaking. I kid you not, random objects fell off the counter and the computer keyboard started typing random letters. My exercise ball even started bouncing by itself. I also heard strange noises and saw black shadows. I honestly can't explain it. Then one day Oliver sat with his mom on the sofa and told her how that Clara was sad that no one believed her. And she was sad that she was dead. The last straw for this mom's resolve of remaining skeptical had come and gone. She started inquiring about the neighborhood, eventually visiting with an older lady who told her that a few years ago a couple had lived in their home and that they had a daughter who had died, named Clara. Here at St. Michael's, 2 cases come to mind in which the child had a friend which was not so imaginary. The first case was in a home we had been asked to cleanse in the spiritual sense, and the little girl in the home would sit in front of her open closet door and talk to her friend, who wanted her to enter the closet, close the door, and play. In another case, one in which a middle-aged couple lived with her mother and their small daughter, the mother-in-law was the principal caregiver to the child and often related to the parents how her grandchild frequently talked to her invisible friend. When weird things started happening in the home, events common to a poltergeist-type haunting, the couple contacted a paranormal investigation team, who eventually referred the couple to me. As per their request, I met the couple at a restaurant for my initial interview. They wanted to convey to me delicacies of the situation. They were convinced that the entity their daughter was friends with was not simply a part of the child's imagination, but rather something else, and they wanted to keep their daughter from finding out that a priest was coming to rid the home of her friend. That plan, that of keeping my visit a secret, did not work out. The couple and the child's grandmother all swear they absolutely did not tell the child of my upcoming visit. But grandmother reported that the child told her the entity, the so-called imaginary friend, had told the child that a man was coming to make it go away. Assuming everyone involved was telling the truth and that there was no way the child could have found out about my upcoming visit, how did she have prior knowledge that an exorcist was coming to her home? Most psychologists agree that imaginary friends or companions are beneficial to the child's development, but most also recommend that a parent seek professional counseling when the unseen entity turns nasty. Watch your children carefully when they admit they have an imaginary friend, but when the child begins to say things like, "It told me to do," or "It told me not to do as you told me," or when the child begins to act out as if he or she is not itself but some other character, breaking, destroying things, or even hurting animals or other children, then you must seek help immediately, as you either have a child with some type of mental illness or there is a demonic infestation in your home. In conclusion, we find a growing number of people from all walks of life who are recognizing that there are spiritual entities which are capable of causing tremendous grief to the living. Even within the mental health care profession, one that has in the past always disavowed diabolical possession, we now see doctors who prescribe, in some cases, mental and spiritual interventions, some even going as far as to take part in exorcisms themselves. We have touched on in this report the increasingly common phenomenon of temporary possession, in which the victim is only possessed for a short time, as if to allow the entity to perform a specific task. We've considered that in some cases the victim may have a sort of amnesia, not being able to remember the time in which he or she was possessed, and we have looked at conditions in which the victim is aware, as if having an out-of-body experience, watching their body do things totally out of character. And we have looked at the imaginary friends of our children, which in some extreme cases are indicative of dissociative identity disorder, and demonic oppression in other cases, in which an entity appears to the child, inciting the child to misbehave, and we have discussed the possibility in rare cases of the child actually being possessed. We live in unsettling times, days when we hear reports in the news highlighting how some maniac shot up a church or stabbed multiple people in the neighborhood Walmart. A time in which self-defense experts tell us to keep our heads as if on a swivel, watching everything going on around us, always alert to danger, practicing situational awareness. Likewise, we need to be just as equally aware of potential threats from the spiritual realm, which is very real. Not just old urban legends or even plot lines from a television series like Supernatural. I would like to take this opportunity to thank you for joining us today and to ask that if you enjoyed our presentation, to please click on the like and subscribe buttons. The cases of paranormal related events described in each episode are intended to raise the audience's awareness of religious and spiritually related topics. St. Michael's Journal is one of the publishing ministries affiliated with the Archdiocese of St. Michael's, an independent liturgical and sacramental church. Finally, until we meet again, may the peace of Christ be with you and yours forever.